This is the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast, brought to you by Sysco. Sysco is here to help set you up for success by delivering high-quality foods, products, and services for your restaurant. Recording live to digital from the NCF&B studios in downtown Raleigh. Join us as we lead you into the kitchen, inside the bottle, and into the minds of the food and beverage industry. And now, over imbibing and abundantly indulging for journalistic integrity, it's Max Trujillo and Matthew Weiss.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And anybody who listens to this podcast knows that we are huge fans of ethically raised animals, regenerative farming. We just geek out and nerd out to that stuff. And here today to tell us all about how they do it out at Hickory Nut Gap Farm is one Jamie Ager.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you in studio. Thanks for driving all the way out here. You came from the other side of the state. That's no easy feat, but do you come out here? Do you get out to the Triangle?
You know, we come down to Raleigh sometimes, a couple times a year, and it's always a good excuse. We have some customers down here, and this afternoon in Charlotte is the North Carolina, Department of Agriculture has Flavors of the Carolina Food Show. So we got some people there.
Okay.
So I'm going to swing by there on the way home. So it worked out really well.
You may see my wife there. I was going to join her as well,
cool.
But someone has to pick up the kids. So so I will be there in spirit, and she's going to be there instead.
Perfect.
Pretty soon they'll be driving, so you won't even have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Before you know it.
The last time I was at Flavors of Carolina, it goes back years. It's like 4 years. I did my first phone-in interview on the Adam Carolla show from there, because I remember that was the only time they had, and I'm like, I'm going to be at this event. So I went up to the hotel room and did my little bit at the time and then came back down.
Good times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the beginning of my star-studded career.
Yeah, your
Nice.
celebrity.
Yeah.
So
4 years ago.
Yeah.
yeah. So Jamie, tell us all about Hickory Nut Gap Farm. You guys are doing all grass-fed, animal-raised products. And how did it start? How did you guys become on this cutting edge of what is now regenerative farming?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking. So I grew up on a farm outside of Asheville in Fairview, North Carolina.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, it goes back a long time, right? I'm a fourth generation on the farm there.
That's amazing.
And so we've got like 20-some cousins that all live around there. And my great-grandparents moved to Western North Carolina in 1916. So we've been on the farm for over 100 years at this point. And my great-grandfather was a Presbyterian minister.
Okay.
And so he was very idealistic. And he came from Chicago, and his father was a minister too. And in 1916 in Western North Carolina, it was a pretty poverty-stricken, Appalachia, sort of the stereotypical
What would
Appalachian.
bring them out? Do you have any idea what would bring them out from Chicago? Was it religion or?
It was. I think he was just kind of a rambling man, and he enjoyed traveling around, and he was on his honeymoon.
Okay.
And he and his wife were cruising around the country in a Model T.
Yeah.
And they
So they were
found
of
this
means.
farm.
If they had a
were
Model
of
T at
some
that
means.
time.
Yeah, they were of some means, and I guess they were. She was actually from a banking family, so she was probably the one who had the means.
Yeah.
And
marry money. That's what I tell my
smart
tell my
move,
kids.
man.
Yeah. Don't worry about the relationship. Look, just marry money.
Yeah, and the story's funny too, because the family home was built in the 1800s there at the farm, and the story that I've been told, is that my great-grandfather found out this place was for sale, and land was pretty cheap at that point, and so he went upstairs to make a deal with this 80-year-old man who owned the farm, and was talking to him upstairs. Meanwhile, on the porch, my great-grandmother was on the porch with the 80-year-old man's 22-year-old wife.
Oh,
who
of course. There you
Who
go.
was weeping the whole time and felt like she was so remote that she just needed to move back to town. And
Gotcha.
so the real deal happened on the porch, because she had the money. She had access to money, right? And so that's the beginning of it. And then, as an idealistic person, my great-grandfather ended up starting a farmers co-op in Western North Carolina that became a pretty prominent institution, and they had like feed and seeds all over the area. They would have these picnics throughout Western North Carolina. Every summer they would go to all these rural communities and have a picnic and talk about new tobacco varieties or corn varieties or cattle genetics. And so it really was a community building activity. And even when I talk to old timers now from Western North Carolina, they remember these Federation picnics as a part of their childhood experience. And, you know, how many people can you fit in the back of a truck, contests and watermelon spit and seed contests, fun things, right? And then, but then, you know, so I'm going way back in history, but I think the strain of idealism remains, and so the farm where we grew up, we had a dairy farm after World War II, which was very typical of a lot of small farms, especially in Western North Carolina. The primary sort of agricultural economy of Western North Carolina was small scale burley tobacco and dairy, and so our farm, we milked 50 cows, something like that. So, but when I was 12 years old, 1989, we sold the dairy. And so that was a pretty big move by the family, and so then I was about, you know, a young man, and so we raised a few beef cows at that point. We always had some chickens. My mom always raised chickens, and so we were selling to the co-ops in town, selling local eggs, and we grew quite a few raspberries, and so I think the farm was mostly used as a way to raise me and my brothers, and keep us productive,
but
right?
But the cash crop was still tobacco at that growing up.
No, not mostly dairy as a kid.
It was mostly dairy.
And then when we sold that, there wasn't a whole lot going on, right? And agriculture was not seen as like a great opportunity for me or my brothers to try to pursue. Other than like it's a great way to raise children. And so just keep them busy, right? Putting up hay, doing all the things. And so, but then I went to Warren Wilson College, just outside of Asheville, so I didn't go far from home. And I got kind of introduced to all these ideas about sustainable agriculture, pasture-based meats, direct marketing, these inspiring notions about how do we change the food system. And I ended up studying, I got a double major there in history and then environmental studies, with a concentration in sustainable ag. So at that point, I kind of started really digging into like the food system and change. Yeah, and meanwhile, cool. I was super lucky, right? Because my family's farm didn't really have a lot of direction. My mom was kind of running the day to day. My dad was working off the farm. And so when I had all these big ideas, my parents were like, go for it. Like, that's awesome. Try it out. It wasn't like there was some other person there like saying, hell no, that's crazy. We're not going to do that, which might have been good.
I love this story and the genesis of it. And I'm just curious because you're a fourth generation farmer.
That's right.
So, but your dad was working off the farm.
Correct.
So what was he doing? Like,
there was a educational and development fund that he was kind of focused on. I mean, we lived there on the farm, so it was kind of all around us. But his income was off the farm.
Okay.
And so my mom really was
running the farm.
Yeah.
But because he was in a somewhat education job, because I'm just thinking like my knowledge of farmers in Western Carolina, and then like going to school and being a double major, academics were somewhat of an important. Education was emphasized.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, my great grandparents were all educated ministers, and so education's always been a priority for our family, for sure. And
but then you connected the stuff to back to the farm, that you took your education and your majors and you like actually applied it, which is, I mean, I'm
pretty
a history
unusual,
major,
right?
so go figure that.
I wonder if your great grandparents knew my great grandparents. I think I told you this, and I found it, Matt.
Oh wow, this is interesting.
On the old Ancestry.com, John
not
Anderson
sponsored
Deaver.
by Ancestry.com, but
not
could
sponsored,
be. If you're listening, Ancestry.
For it. My great grandfather was born and raised in Buncombe County, and he was the cartographer. What is that?
You draw maps.
He drew the first map of the Buncombe County. Like he actually was the first one to draw it out. And if you go into the Asheville City Hall, they have the original map, and it's signed J. Deaver. That's my great grandfather.
I bet they were around each other for sure at some point.
They're
along
the same,
way.
Same age and all that, same area.
You would think freaking Buncombe County would have given us some reciprocity for drawing the freaking map.
I know, yeah.
When we were out there
Buncombe.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you're not always friends with all your family members, so maybe this is just like maybe my great grandfather was a pain in the ass.
Planted the seeds for antagonism.
Yeah, but I always like to reinforce this. Like, if anybody was like, "What are these guys doing?" North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast.
There you go.
Roots, baby. We got the deep roots here.
Right.
But you didn't know that until somewhat recently. No,
fake news. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. No, I didn't know until we found it on.
It's your
that's really cool.
Paternal. By the way, Max has an insane origin story. One day you are going to record it or something like that.
Yeah, I met my mom. I went out to see I know my mom. I went out to see my mom over the holidays to record her story because it's so fascinating. In just the sense that she's an orphan and, like all this crazy stuff. But what I don't know very much about is my father's side of the family. And that's what this side is. So this is my father. He's like 100% English, Scottish. So I'm like half white, if you will. And then my mom's Latina. And but I grew up with my mom. So like as far as my identity, if you will, like where I grew up and like the neighborhoods I grew up in and like the culture that I was around, it was all Mexican. And so, but then I look like this was just kind of quasi in between, kind of more leaning towards looking like a white guy. So,
you're true American.
I'm American. There you go. That is exactly right.
There you go.
But it's cool. So yeah, my dad's family, kind of started in North Carolina and then they Oklahoma and then eventually California.
Yeah. By the way, I want to get back to the farm.
Sure.
But I want to pause now for a quick sec. You guys at Hickory Nut Gap supply our good friends, our title sponsor Cisco, with some product, don't you?
Yes, yeah, we do.
Yeah. How does that work with them?
So I mean, Cisco's a customer.
Yeah.
And we're in the food service business. From a channel strategy, we sell a lot of product into tons of restaurants, and we kind of started selling just me driving to town, kind of joking around with chefs and being like, "Hey, man, are you interested in paying twice as much for ground beef?"
Yeah, right.
It's always a great opener.
That's good.
It starts a conversation,
yeah.
Right? And so, and fortunately, some of them did. And one of those customers that we started working with was Tupelo Honey.
Okay.
They went in their first little store, in a restaurant right there in Asheville. And I remember climbing down to the basement and trying to convince them to buy some. They bought like 20 pounds a week. I was like, sure, man, let's help this little guy out,
Yeah,
that's cool.
And it was really cool. And then we kept growing with it. And then they picked up our sausage, and then they grew into a much more larger organization with a lot more
locations.
Stores,
they're out here, they're here in Raleigh too. Yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously we couldn't carry that product to them independently, and so they set us all up into Cisco, and so that's been a key for us to be able to carry the product to customers.
Yeah. So look at the good they do in the sense of they are able to facilitate getting you, a relatively small guy, family farm, to now somebody that you've grown with like Tupelo Honey, because they can facilitate the distribution. So
yeah, because Cisco isn't just our partner; they're partners with companies like yourself at Hickory Nut Gap and local ranchers, growers, and producers, and any other distributor, more than any other distributor in the industry. That's why their commitment to community is unmatched.
It isn't enough for them to be the global leader in food service. Cisco's mission also has heart, a heart for food, a heart for service, and a heart for community.
And how do they follow through? Well, supporting farm-to-table initiatives to deliver the very best local products, partnering with food banks and nonprofits to help underserved communities around the world and here at home, fighting hunger, because isn't that what food service is all about?
Visit Sysco.com, that's SYSCO.com, to learn more about their heartfelt commitment to community.
Yeah, Cisco, at the heart of food and service. And if you want to get Hickory Nut Gap and you're a Cisco customer, you can give them a call.
There you go.
Call your rep.
It's all synergistic here on the NCF&B pod.
Well, we'll take a quick break to get our caffeine fix from our friend out there in Carborough, Lane Mitchell. You're on the line. Hello.
Hi, how are you doing today, guys?
We're doing great. What's going on in your neck of the woods? Is it as beautiful out as it is here?
Oh my gosh, it feels like springtime in Chapel Hill here. Like 65 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. Some of my favorite weather.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're all sipping on the coffee that you provided us. What are we drinking today?
in celebration and recognition of Jamie and what Hickory Nut Gap has been doing with farmers, for generations now, I selected one of our long-term direct relationships on the Sosa Familia. This is from Comayagua, Honduras. We had started working with the senior of the family, Tomas, in 2007, and he had passed away in 2017, and he had 3 sons, but none of them were actually part of the farm activities because, gosh, Dad did it all, right?
Yeah.
And so when he passed away, we had to work with the sons to figure out what was going to happen with the farm. Would it be passed on to the sons? Would it be sold off? And thank goodness, part of our kind of what we do on the ground with our farmers and our personal relationships with them is to give the sons confidence to take over this farm that they hadn't been involved in. And so the oldest son, Giovanni, is the one who's took over the farm. We put his picture on our coffee bags. We always put our farmers' pictures on the coffee bags, and we're really excited to help him go from a farmer's son to a leading coffee producer in the world. So what you're drinking now is El Aguacate. It's a washed Caturra. It's named after, aguacate is Spanish for avocados, as you probably know, and they were avocado farmers before they became coffee farmers. And so they named their primary crop after their avocado farm. So that's what we're drinking today. It's really kind of dark chocolate, medium roast dark chocolate, some nice fruits, stone fruits and citrus in it. And we're just so proud of Giovanni and his brothers and taking over the farm and working with them to become the great farmers that they are.
Yeah, well, it's delicious, and we appreciate you providing that for us. It keeps us going. Matt was nodding off over there in the very beginning, so we
needed a coffee up.
Yeah, we got him up to speed. But thank you so much for our listeners out there. Go to carboroughcoffee.com and learn more there. But thank you again, Lane. We will see you soon.
Thanks, Lane.
Take care.
Okay, so you went to school, you went to Warren Wilson, and then you come back to the family farm after graduating college, or did you
No,
try?
That's right. Yeah. Well, I had a girlfriend, and our senior project was building sort of a pro forma business model for some of these ideas that we had about grass-fed beef and pasture-raised pigs and pasture-raised poultry. And so, we came back to the farm and started selling stuff just directly to customers.
Okay.
Not any restaurants or anything at that point.
Because all before it was all to cooperatives or co-ops?
Yeah, I mean, mostly before it was just to, the eggs was mostly food co-ops, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, the meat
Local
business
families.
is tough, right? Because you got to get everything USDA processed in order to sell it to a retailer.
Right.
And most of the processing plants that were existing in Western North Carolina at the time were not USDA set up, so everything was stamped not for sale.
Oh.
And so we had to technically sell everything as a whole cow or a quarter side of a cow, and then a custom. You would come and pick it up at the farm and pay me $500 for a half side of beef. That was kind of how we did it for a while.
But and then I would take it to the processing plant to get butchered.
So we would take it to the butcher,
Yeah.
and then they would all wrap it in white butcher paper,
Okay.
and freeze it, and then stamp it not for sale, and then we'd have a couple boxes there that you would bring home.
Okay.
And so that was really how we started things. But obviously that's not a very large sector of the population that buys meat that way.
Yeah.
So that was kind of
I mean,
an
Max
unusual
likes
way
to buy
do
half
it.
sides of cows, but we don't.
Just twice a year, that's all. Yeah.
1 cow a year. That's the perfect diet.
Yeah. Speaking of diet, you just said that. That was leading where I was going. Is you're primarily grass-fed. Your beef is grass-fed. Is that correct?
That's right.
We've talked to other producers in the past where they do a mixture. They'll have a little grain, and they'll do their finish. It's what are we making, a cocktail or something over here?
Yeah.
But it's we start them with the first course of some grass, and we finish it with a little grain. But you do solely grass-fed.
Right.
What is the reasoning behind that?
It's the idea of grass-fed beef, I think, is a pretty big shift away from the mainstream, current mainstream beef industry.
Uh-huh.
And, over the past 100 years, American agriculture has really, been driven primarily by consumers who are looking for a low-cost product. to buy cheap food, right?
Yeah.
And so feedlots were really introduced as a great way to kind of, with the Green Revolution in the 50s, we had an overabundance of corn and other grains, and so a great way to use that overabundance was to put cows on it and put them on feed. And by the way, they gain a lot of weight and do really well from a weight gain standpoint.
Right.
With grass-fed beef, it really is seen as like a artisanal way of producing beef more locally. And when we think about from the environmental impact, if we're taking grass, which humans can't eat, and we're turning that grass into beef, there's really no negative ramification from a waste management standpoint either. Because when these large, massive feedlots that exist in the West, anytime you concentrate animals or anytime you concentrate people, generally there's more sickness, right? And so in that scenario, you're going to end up with a need for more pharmaceuticals, more antibiotics, that type of thing. And so by keeping livestock on pasture their whole lives, there's way less. It's much more natural for them to live out there, so they're not going to get as sick. We rarely have to treat any antibiotics. If an animal gets cuts its leg on a barbed wire fence or something and it gets infected, that's a good appropriate use of antibiotics.
Sure.
But as far as like routine antibiotics, a grass-based paradigm really doesn't have much of a need for them at all. And so and then the whole concept of grazing management and using what we call rotational grazing, management intensive grazing, there's a lot of formulations, but the concept of high density, short duration management of animals. And when you do this, you put a lot of animals on a small amount of land, graze it down, and then you move them. Mm-hmm. And that high density, that pulsing of the grass growth, let the grass grow up big, thick, and deep, and which is really like the way the grasslands were evolved, like in the prairie systems, where then cattle and bison are all herd animals, right? So they're going to be bunched up. So when they come in, they graze an area, poop and pee everywhere, and then you move them. And that type of grazing management lets the grass grow up big, thick, and deep, and then comes down, gets mowed off, and then regrows. And that pulsing of the grass growth really does amazing things underneath the ground.
Yeah.
Because those roots get to really go deep into the soil. You get a lot more water penetration of the soil, a lot more mineralization from the soil, and ultimately it builds a much more organic matter and soil health for the long term. So these ideas got me really excited, right? And these are all grazing, grass-based paradigms of how we can raise livestock in order to benefit the environment at the end of the day. And to me, when we talk about agriculture and you talk about the ideals of agriculture, the idea, my major is in sustainable agriculture, but sustainable as a word means just kind of like sustaining something. And so this whole vocabulary of using the word regenerative is actually more accurate in that with these grazing systems that
you're not just getting by, you're growing it, you're building it, or you're reinforcing it, you're improving it.
Yeah. And the idea that we can do that in agriculture really is exciting. And so that's cool.
Well, when a few years ago we had Joyce Farms and Dr. Alan Cummings was
Alan Williams. Totally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Alan Williams, he said that if 10% more of the farms in the world would use regenerative agriculture, we would essentially solve any like earth crisis or global warming, climate change, etc. Which is amazing. I mean, but it makes so much sense. And by the way, it's also coming into the wine business very like I was out in Willamette Valley in Portland or outside of Portland, Oregon over the summer, and Argyle Winery is very into regenerative farming, and they're kind of figuring it out, but so they don't plow or till the land or when they do, it's in a very specific way, like you're saying, and how they cut the grass, and they were saying it just in terms of your footprint because you're not plowing. Plus, you're having to plant less because your vine health is longer, right? So just imagine you're extending your vine life from having to replant every, let's say, 25 to 30 years to now 50 years. How much less over time that is impacting, and all the impacts you're putting on the earth by the manual labor and the machine labor to plant a vineyard. So I imagine that's a similar thing with even pasture raised, like it's just less impactful, less imprint you're doing on the earth.
Yeah, and I mean Alan Williams is a mentor for sure. Like
okay,
he's
cool.
been somebody I've been reading about since college and paying attention to. So it's really cool to hear him referenced. And he's certainly traveled the world and really sold this thing to so many different farmers and ranchers in so many different ways. So it's really cool to the work he's done. And I think it's, one of the things I've always believed is true is that agriculture and the food system are so complex that our attempts to try to label them with anything are really difficult, right? Like we all know that one word like organic or regenerative even or pasture raised, all these words try to describe a really complicated thing.
Yeah.
And the wine industry is super different than beef cattle, which is super different than peanuts, which is super different than cotton for apparel, right? Yeah. And so the challenge, and I'm also a dad who goes to Food Lion on Sunday night, late at night, to grab peanut butter for the kids, right?
Thank goodness you said that, man. I feel so guilty when I'm like, buying these processed foods, but when you have young kids, sometimes you just like...
Life's busy. You got 2 seconds or something at the grocery store to make a decision, and that's like, oh, let's just grab the organic stuff. I don't know how...
And also, because like the kids won't eat the good stuff, the quote unquote like healthy good stuff. They're like, nah, I want Doritos. And I want Velveeta. And it's like, and at some point you're just like looking at this malnourished child and you're like, I just got to put anything into their system just to get some calorie intake into them. They're wasting away.
The good thing about being in the meat business is I can generally get I got 3 teenage boys. So like we're good at eating meat.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. Couple questions I had. Like one for you, Matt, and I wonder if they've discussed this with being Matt's the wine professional here in the room, right? So when it comes to like what is it, biodiversity of crop and all that, like you were mentioning, JB, like moving the cattle, they'll go here, then they'll go to the next plot, and they'll go to the next plot, and that way the land has a chance to kind of like recover. And also, not just get pummeled. I guess like the point is like, if you just had corn growing in this one area for the like last 15 years, that the ground would kind of reduce in its elements and its minerals and its richness because it's not being diversified. Like it's not being regrown in different areas.
I think you can grow a certain crop. It's about the cover crops and the ancillary crops around it, or the things that are growing that creates the biodiversity.
Okay, is that okay? Because that was my thought. Is like if you planted a wine vine and it lasted for 25 to 50 years, that's all it is this whole time. So is it that you're also intermingling other things into the vineyard?
Yep.
Okay.
That's the cover cropping systems in between, like the rows, right, is what they're doing. And then you plant something that's flowering, so then you get pollinators, and plant a diverse mix, right? That's clearly.
And they were saying that their soil is so healthy that like the microbes in the soil, microbial was like 7 billion different parts of microbes or something like that. So yeah,
I mean,
it was
crazy. As we evolve as humans and learn and things, microbes and bacteria is scary. Like 100 years ago, everybody was scared of it, right? We just like first discovered it. It's like, oh crap, this stuff can kill you. Yeah. And then now that we're learning more and more about science and learning more about nature and learning about soil health, we're learning that actually we don't want to kill everything in the soil. Like this is the stuff that makes it all really good.
There's good
like
bacteria.
0.0001% that can kill you, but actually 99.9% of the stuff is absolutely necessary and critical.
Like that gut health kind of mentality. It's like the more diversity you have in there, the better you are to sustain yourself against viruses and illnesses and all that.
Totally.
Being that, especially on the West Coast, it's also known for growing other things that are fun to enjoy and are now legal, like let's say in California, and I think in Oregon,
Washington,
the whole side,
Colorado.
Like, why aren't there? And maybe there are. So I'm just speaking out of my ass as I normally do. But having like vineyards that are like 1 row grapes, 1 row weed, 1 row grapes, 1 row weed. Like, wouldn't that would be great? I bet for both crops to have that type of like diversity, but then I don't know, or maybe it would just make all the grapes taste piney.
Probably a little. This wine is extra herbaceous. Yes, it is.
That is some
not very yummy.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm sure there's. Do you know of people that are doing that are growing like interchangeable crops within rows? I imagine farming wise, logistically, that's got to be a pain in the butt.
I think this is one of the challenges of like the food system broadly speaking, right? It's like there's cool ideas out there, and even the word regenerative, like you guys are familiar with it, obviously, which is great. But it's like I think there was a consumer survey that I read about like what does regenerative mean, and most people think that regenerative means like cell-based cultured meat that's regenerating in a petri dish and making lab-grown meat the normal thing, right?
Right.
So if they see the word regenerative, it's like that's not what we mean.
Yeah.
And so like we're regenerating meat in petri dishes.
We're not even close. Regenerative is like 5 classes ahead of what most things are like in my TikTok feed.
Yeah.
It's like guys interviewing people on the street, like, name 3 countries, and they're like, Paris. That's what we're dealing with as humans
oh my
right now.
God.
Yeah.
We're gonna
It's
get
like-
to we're not that far away from an idiocracy, right?
Oh, we're there.
Oh my God.
We're there.
Well, but here's the thing. I also want to get back to this question because we talked about it, this idea of global warming and climate change. There's always climate change. There's always global warming, right? Like otherwise we would still have dinosaurs around if there wasn't climate change.
Watch out, Matt.
Right?
We're going to get kicked off of YouTube for that heresy you talk of.
Well, but I'm saying this is not a new. Now, I mean,
Sure.
I guess in a very simplified way, is a concern is that the climate change is happening much more rapidly than it has in the Earth's history. Maybe I'm asking, like, what are your thoughts on that? Because you're saying, in part of your guys' literature, you're saying that this is really healthy for the Earth,
Sure.
the way that the regenerative farming is,
Yeah.
and it can stop, calm the rapidly changing climate.
Yeah, and I'm no expert on climate change.
Okay.
Kind of like where that's all at, right? But
Definitely
what I
avoided that.
do know, what I do know is that like increasing biodiversity on the earth, increasing water quality, making the mineral cycle more healthy and similar to nature, the way nature works, and creating healthier food at the end of the day are good activities.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, if we can help sink carbon, the simple answer to that is like when you do these types of regenerative practices, grazing management, cover cropping, all these things, essentially what you're doing is building organic matter in the soil. And so there's nothing, that's always a good thing. You want more organic matter in the soil. And what is organic matter is basically carbon. And so if you're taking agriculture systems and using those systems to take carbon out of the atmosphere and sink it into our soils, that's a total win. And so in that context, when you look at the graphs of like all the carbon in the air versus 100 years ago, whatever, clearly there's some more carbon in the air. And so if that's true, then let's take that carbon and put it into our soils and create healthier soils and see an opportunity there on how we can do that well through our agriculture systems.
It also seems so simple when you say it that way.
Well, yeah, and the problem is that we have this massive food system that's already
Right.
built, right?
Yeah.
And so we're at Hickory Nut Gap, like we have a completely different vision for looking at that sort of more holistically.
Yeah.
And when we say holistically, we're inspired by the concepts of like we call it our community partner model. And so I think one of the bad habits of capitalism is that, and capitalism's been an amazing thing for humanity and generated tons of wealth and is a remarkable thing on a historical perspective. But one of the bad habits is this concept of externalizing costs, and oftentimes companies win financially when they do a good job externalizing costs onto things like the environment or onto things like the welfare of the animals or onto their employees, right? And so that concept of externalizing costs and then having your P&L look strong due to that is one of the things that I think we need to think about differently in sort of like businesses that are doing purpose-driven businesses. And so in that context, we call it our community purpose model, or our community stakeholder engagement model, or community partner model, where we really want to see anybody that we do business with or interact with thrive. And so, like, what does that mean? How do we create better soil health? How do we create better, more humane conditions for the animals? How do we take care of our employees better? How do we take care of the customers that we work with ultimately better? And that, there's a whole like stakeholder capitalism belief system out there that's gaining traction. And that's exciting. But at the end of the day, that's a pretty big difference than most of the way the food system's been built, which was pretty much just a of how do we get it the cheapest
Yeah.
to the customer. And so it's really built now. So how do we sort of unwind some of that using some of the systems of it, right?
I was lamenting. I was having a fun conversation with one of our industry professionals who shall go unnamed, but sells in this area, and we were talking about wine sales. It's not Matt, it's somebody else. But we were talking about capitalism, and it's like capitalism's great, except for when it's actually successful. Like when it gets to the point where all the systems are working perfectly, then it like overconsumes its own industry and kind of then steps on the toes of its neighboring industries. And we were laughing because in sales, and Matt would probably know this, if you are a wine rep or a liquor rep and you got a territory and you crush it, and let's just say that the rep before you sold $500,000 and that's what that territory was used to, and then you go in and you're like at 1.5 million. What do? What would they typically do with you, Matt?
Fire the other guy?
No, they would split your territory up.
Oh, yeah.
They usually split your territory up and then go like, now this region has done so well, it can actually support more salaries.
Sales. Yeah.
So then the person that did a great job like gets a cut in pay, loses because it's all commission based.
Right.
And then a new rep comes in and they don't know if that new person's going to do well or not. I'm like, can you imagine if that's the way capitalism actually worked? That like when Amazon hit, 20 billion, they had to diversify. They had to break into two companies and split it up because that's the way it works inside the corporation.
Yeah, that's
that anytime any factor goes up, it splits so that it keeps most of the workforce kind of at the same level. You don't want to have your star salesman making, 7 figures when the CEO isn't making that much. They're like, no, we can't have that. So we got to break him down again and keep all of those guys down.
Getting all those things structured right is hard.
Yeah, but it's weird that in the same system of the business that internally
But I'm not sure
they do
that's
that.
always true. I mean, yes, in sales or sometimes, but that's also the larger corporation not wanting to pay you so much money. So they and they're also thinking, I can conquer more of the market if I have 2 people there. And
yeah, but I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that a lot of salesmen, a lot of our, like Cisco reps and other food reps and a lot of like beer and wine sales guys listen to this show. How many of you are shaking your head? Yep. Like as soon as I do a great job, I get tasked for it. They take away like my top 5 accounts. Like, we're going to give this to this other brand new person because you have so much. It's like, but
you can go build it again.
Yeah, that's the mentality,
Yeah.
which is kind of flawed, I would say.
Yeah, but I think the capitalism argument in here is based on huge corporations and then how they're in bed with the government, right? Like, your community program is amazing, but I'm sitting here in the thinking like the negative part of me is thinking like, no, we need the companies like McDonald's, like Starbucks, who's in the food business now, like your beloved Taco Bell, to stop buying all this subsidized hugely grass-fed beef and start buying from, or at least have some program where they're buying other stuff from small farmers, right? Because that's where capitalism gets into the problem, is because these big corporations like the McDonald's, like people who sell you your hamburger, at $1 or $2 or whatever it is, they're feeding the machine. And consumers, like when you're on a road trip with your kids, we stop at McDonald's, right? Because this is crazy. They like it. It's cheap. It's quick. I can get this. But
where
the
else
problem
are you
is,
going to go?
where else are you going to go? Well, our friend, the original sponsor of this show, and the more I get further away from it, Steve Mangano had such a great idea. It was ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And this is getting off subject, but he had an app called Curate where he had local food people being able to curate a place where you could go in any city, in any area. And especially like if you're traveling, and you didn't want to stop at McDonald's, you could go buy from a local non-chain restaurant or something like that.
Food and beverage directory, but created by the locals of that area.
Yeah.
So like wherever we're at in your town, you would say, these are the best coffee shops. These are the best burger joints because I live here.
Something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, it was an app.
So when you're in a new town, like you're in St. Louis, there are locals in St. Louis that create their own lists of the area, and they're just regular people. They're not like funded by Tyson or whatever. It's like, no, they're just regular people saying this is where you want to eat. That's what was so super cool about it.
Yeah, it was just the technology wasn't up to snuff yet. But
anyway, it's so hard to know.
And then the industry shut down. That's really the reason.
No, that was way before COVID. I mean,
no, he shut it down during COVID because there were no restaurants open, and so no one was traveling. Everyone was on lockdown. So what would you need Curie for at that point? Anyhow, we'll talk to Steve Mangano soon. He has things in the works that I know about, and I'm excited to share at some point, but not today.
But to that point, I mean, thinking about I think the macro problem is how do we get more people buying from local farmers, from pasture raised beef, from regenerative farmers, right? As opposed to the big feed cattle farms, wherever they may be. And one of my thinking and solutions is like we have to incentivize big business to buy from these farmers, but that also creates a problem because they're also in bed with the government people, whoever subsidizing those cattle farmers, and there's too much money that's being earned and made there.
It's already built.
That's already built in the food systems you talked about. But I know today, because we were speaking with Mary, who does your PR, that you guys were actually in Raleigh and the area talking to some of the bigger institutions, like educational institutions. Always comes back to education. And so now I'm thinking they could also be, like the university system's a huge proponent of buying local and buying those things and not buying the institutionalized things.
100%. I mean, and we're selling now to the school systems in North Carolina, and I've got kids go to public schools. So it's really cool for us to know that they're able to get some good grass-fed beef raised around here in the school systems. And then how do we sell to all these institutions that do have increasingly are looking for local, regionally raised, humane production systems out there? And so those are, and one of the big challenges in the meat business is that the utilization and carcass balance is such a challenge, right? Because gross margins are really tight in the meat business. And so you're never going to, if you don't sell that whole carcass evenly all the way through, then you're going to start putting a lot of dollars in the freezer if you're not really careful. And that's not a good way to operate a business model. And so, having a place to move all that ground product is certainly a great, having the school systems and everybody like that. And then teaching kids about the importance and actually where food comes from. Because there's so many people that are so disconnected from the food system right now, and learning that, humans rely on nature for food. Like, what a concept that is, but it's true. And so, it can start really simple like that, but then how do we create more education for folks? And, that question you brought up about sort of like the large institutions contributing to regenerative systems and believing in these regenerative systems. And there's so many different, in my mind, there's so many different paradigm shifts that need to be reconsidered, like, for example, like the business models of restaurants and what your food costs need to be, right? These are like big paradigm shifting questions that might need to be taken a look at if we're going to look at rethinking our food systems. And that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Well, it is because I mean restaurants, first of all, don't make a large profit to begin with,
or any at all,
any at all. But also at the end consumer, and you're feeding your family, and maybe you're not of great means, but that you can go to Food Line and get a whole rotisserie chicken for $7 or $8 that feeds your family. Now we all know that that's somehow a fake price of the rotisserie chicken, and somehow that is being fed by large business and subsidized. Yet how do you change that end person's consumer, that end consumer's mind to now pay? I mean, what's the real price? I mean, what's the price of a full chicken?
Like
from
$25.
$25,
right?
not
like,
even, and then I have to cook it, and probably feather it.
Totally.
What we really need some lobbyists in the restaurant sector to lobby for those subsidies, because you yourself as a rancher, like when you're small,
right?
It costs a lot of money to produce what you're trying to sell.
Totally.
And the same goes true for all these big, huge cattle companies all across the middle of the country, but they're getting subsidized so that they keep the price down.
And it's a game of pennies too. Like, everything is so massively scaled,
right?
That it's just like, until we're all like playing around with different regenerative farming systems and trying to figure out what those are, and they're all like not to scale, right?
Yeah.
So it's like A, different system, B, super tiny, and then like all those costs at this point get passed on to the consumer. Whereas what you're saying is like the massive food business, big food, is able to.
But what you're going to end up seeing though is like if those subsidies ever did say find its way into the restaurant industry, it wouldn't be for the local mom and pop. It wouldn't be Ashley Christensen's restaurant or, Vivian Howard's or Ricky Moore's. It would be P.F. Chang's. It would be Darden. And they would get like some massive subsidy, which would then ruin and cripple the food and beverage industry even more when it comes to independent growers. You know what I mean? So like you are the independent restaurant in this analogy,
sure.
as Hickory Nut Gap, but like Tyson Chicken, just use them because they're a big name, probably gets a lot of subsidies to keep their prices down so that people can eat more chicken at Chick-fil-A.
Well, it's not Tyson Chicken. It's those huge farmers who are growing those chickens now that are getting the subsidies. I mean, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that it's not Tyson because they're profiting.
Well, let's just say it's the whole vertical of chicken, right? Like from the farmers to the processors, all the way through. There's a way to keep the pricing down because we have such a need for chicken fingers, like we're just doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
I guess one thing that's giving me a reason for hope here is that increasingly companies like Hickory Nut Gap and other friends of ours in the industry, we are friends with like folks in Oregon, Carmen Ranch, and good friends with Stemple Creek Ranch out in California. So there's all these companies that are kind of similar analogs to what we're doing at Hickory Nut Gap. And really leaning into a whole different production model that needs to get sold, with similar channels, but with a much different production model. And these companies are all growing right now, and we're all seeing success in connecting to all the way to the consumer who care about all these things, right? And to me, when we look at the entire food system, like how do you solve such a built, complicated thing and do it in a way that carries the values of an independent restaurant, that carries the values of people, right? Because like we're humans and we don't want to just be like widgets going to do our thing every day. But at the same time, like efficiency matters.
So like where do you
it's
stand?
a really tough balance.
Where do both of you stand on when you first heard that Amazon was buying Whole Foods? That was like, to me, that was like a neck break statement. It was like I could see Amazon in like throwing back like 30 years ago, a company like Amazon buying a company like Kroger, right? Like some massive company. But Bezos like he zigged when everyone else zagged and went for like high quality distribution and grocery store. Like to that point, everyone, Whole Foods was only ultra high end and still is at that point. Yeah. But now you can also return like the batteries that you bought accidentally.
Yeah, I got some in my truck right now.
Yeah. But I don't know what say both of you, because like we're talking about arguably the biggest company in the world being Amazon going out and lifting up what we consider a pretty honest and good grocer and like making them part of the team. Was that good for the food business, or was that just a lot of three-card Monte hiding good in just making more money for a big machine? I don't know.
I have Whole Foods is our biggest customer, so we love Whole Foods.
So you love this,
and we actually
thank you, Jeff.
hosted their CEO at the farm back in October. So
Whole
6
Foods
months
Market
ago.
CEO, cool.
Yeah.
CEO,
and I think that I have a lot of thoughts here, but like historically admire Whole Foods for really creating a supply chain of creative artisan producers. Right, they really leaned into that. And we were lucky enough to be selling to a small little health food store in Asheville that got purchased by Whole Foods. And then we're like selling. I was like, who do I got to talk to at Whole Foods? I'm ready to sell, right? And then Whole Foods got, and then Whole Foods got the bad reputation as like whole paycheck, right? Because all these artisan producers are expensive and everybody's got gross margins to get. And
Doug Benson has the best joke: Whole Foods for your food hole.
There you go.
Anyhow.
And but then that reputation and everything and that sort of hyper artisanship really was causing them to have economic challenges, in the early of like 2012, 2013. And so they were needing to be bolstered by something. And fortunately, Amazon came in and kind of solved that problem. And one thing I've noticed with Amazon is that it's hard to say what's going on exactly just because I'm a small vendor for such a large company. But they do seem like they're leaning a lot into this regenerative discussion and regenerative agriculture and what does that mean? And they're putting a lot of rigor around anything that's claimed as regenerative on pack, which I appreciate. And something we do at Hickory Nut Gap is we're working with an organization called the Savory Institute. And the Savory Institute is a nonprofit that's really devoted itself to the concept of regenerative farming and really thinking about how do we learn about land improvement. And organic is a claim that most people are familiar with, and the way you become like we were certified organic for many years, and it it's a very regulatory based approach, right? So
it's kind of a bad word in the wine industry.
Okay, there you go. Yeah,
I wouldn't say a bad word. It's just become bullshit now. Like it's
like saying farm to table. It's like everything's farm to table, even the biggest mass farms, and
it's all farm to table.
I don't want to interrupt your flow, but it just organic has become this marketing term, but people who are not in the know still think like, oh, it's organic, so it's better and it tastes better. Like, what a fallacy!
Yeah, well, it's this regulatory one size fits all approach.
Yes,
which is just unhelpful, right? Because I always use apples as an example in Western North Carolina.
Yeah,
and we've grown apples for years at the farm, and we tried to do some organic apples at one point, and like I was so proud of our Gala apples, and I took them to Earth Fair and set them on the shelf, and they had some blemishes, but they looked pretty darn good to me.
Yeah.
And some buyer over there was like, these got to go out of here. They got some blemishes, and I'm like, look, you can't grow certified organic apples in Western North Carolina. Yeah. So if you're going to have apples, they're going to come from Chile or they're going to come from Eastern Washington, and that's just like not ideal. And so what Savory's done, which I really appreciate, is they've created a process called ecological outcome verification. And so it's called EOV is the acronym, and EOV is basically an on-farm thing that we do, and we have other farmers in our supply chain and partnerships, in the region. And so what the EOV process does is you go out onto the farm, you do some soil sampling, you do some biodiversity indexing on soil, on the biodiversity and the whole thing. And there's a whole process, and what we're looking for when we do that is improvement over time. And so we start at year one, and then year two, you should see improvement. Year three, you should see improvement. And what's beautiful about that is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and then it sort of acknowledges that every ecosystem is unique and different. And so that's a much better tool. Like, we all know that we want better soil health. We all know that we want more biodiversity. Like, these are the things that we measure to understand if land is regenerating. And so if that process to me is a more outcomes-based approach, and what works in Western North Carolina might be different than what works in the Piedmont, might be a little different that works on the coastal plain, might be different that works in Arizona, right? And so we need to acknowledge these differences in our ecosystems and how those differences, land management is something we're all learning how to do. And as farmers and ranchers, part of our job is to interact with nature in a beneficial way. Everybody wants to do the right thing. So how do we do it well? Using these tools is a good way to access that.
Maybe that's the catch-all term, like ecological land management, ethical land management, right? Like,
there you go.
Because organic, right, it's become this catch-all term, and it's a way to feed the masses and be like, you should buy this. But imagine we came up with a process that, like, people are buying regenerative farming things. Yeah. They don't even have to know all the details, but they just know, this is good for me, this is good for the earth, let's buy this, right? And that's what organic did beautifully.
Essentially the same consumer that's looking for that, right?
Yeah. But I wonder if they could ever make ecological outcome verification extra virgin olive oil, because that would be super confusing.
They're trying, right?
EVOC, EVOO?
How confusing can we make this for consumers? Let's go for that.
Let's bring it back to center just one last time. I want to get back to that grass fed. I want to get back to your meats before we get out of here. The diet of your cattle. The big argument is, if it's not grain fed or finished with grain, it doesn't taste as good. And what would you say to that conversation when they're just like 100% grass fed is fine, probably better, probably healthier, but it's not as yummy.
Sure. No, it's a fair argument. And the grass-fed industry, I've always heard, is like a good. I read a book, and the guy was like a foodie writer, right? And he was eating steaks all over the world, grass-fed steaks. And the best steak he ever ate was a grass-fed steak. And the worst steak he ever had was a grass-fed steak. And so I think that's really indicative of the industry, right?
Yeah.
The grass-fed industry is very young and not very built yet. And so one of the things that big companies have is just volume. So you can, if you're harvesting 1,000 head a day in a plant, and even the big industry, they don't hit choice every time on feedlot, right? But they can, if you're harvesting 1,000 head a day, 30 to 50% of those animals are going to be choice every day. And with that kind of volume, you can build a program that's a choice program that can go into like a food service distributor. That's consistent, right? And chefs know they can get the same thing every single time. And that's the way the food system currently works. Whereas with the grass-fed program, we're all harvesting way fewer animals on a weekly basis. And so the variability is just bigger. And we can't segregate those animals because it's like we're too small to do that well at the plant every single week. And so, and the seasonality of production is much more, is a bigger factor to consider in that winter time is going to be different than spring, is different than summer, is different than fall from like a grass-based production standpoint. And so, I would say one of the biggest challenges we've had as a company is the food service middle meats category of trying to sell steaks. And so we don't really focus on that as a partner for food service industry a lot. I mean, we've definitely sold some steaks, and like I know the grass-fed beef industry nationally, and I feel really proud of our ability to produce high quality beef.
Yeah.
And when I say high quality, it's got some marbling. We target like a low choice ribeye, even though the grading system for USDA choice and all that is not very adequate, even for the grass-fed paradigm. So it's one more place that like paradigm shifts might need to occur. But like grass-fed ground beef is always incredible. There's always a need to sell more grass-fed ground beef, and so that's always an easy place to target food service customers all day long. And so grass-fed burgers. And, another thing that's interesting is we've done some analysis with an organization called the Bionutrient Food Association, and they asked for some steaks to do some like mineralization and testing and omega-3s and CLAs and all this stuff. And I mean, what you said before, like the health benefits of just grazing cattle and the sort of terpenes and all these sort of micronutrients that are in the food we eat, grass-fed stands out from a health standpoint as like much, much, much more sort of nutrient dense from a food standpoint, from a health standpoint. But at the same time, one thing we're doing in North Carolina and then here in the Southeast is that, when I look at places like upstate New York or the West, often it's difficult to graze year round. And one thing that we're doing that's kind of interesting in North Carolina is we've got, Western North Carolina, Southwest Virginia, we can graze cattle in the summer months at high elevation pastures. And those high elevation pastures, cattle prefer cooler temperatures. And so it doesn't get so hot up there, and the grass grows better, so we can get better average daily gains on the livestock up there. And then what we're also doing is we figured this out through some of our partners is encouraging cover cropping with some of the hog farmers that we work with in North Carolina. Because hog farming involves a lot of growing the corn, right? And so when you grow corn, you need a cover crop behind it if this is a regenerative model. And so when you grow cover crops behind the corn, then we can bring the cattle in and actually graze those cover crops in the January, February, March timeframe. And that's a diverse cover crop, tons of different crimson clovers, vetch. We got tons of different stuff growing in there. And then, by the way, that puts a lot of gain on the cattle in the wintertime down in eastern North Carolina, where it's perfect temperature for cattle in the wintertime. So it's hard to find a year-round production model that works in most of the country. And here in the Southeast, we really have good rainfall. We have, different climates. We can take advantage of that. And so to me, it's really exciting to think about the Southeast as a real, future for grass-based cattle production. And we're going to figure out like the consistency questions and the getting the right genetics dialed in. I mean, agriculture moves slow. Change moves slow. Yeah. I love that about agriculture because there's so many parts of the human experience that are just like trendy and fast and everything changes. And I'm like, just doesn't happen in nature. It doesn't happen in agriculture. And we just have to stay steady and keep building and keep growing and do it right, and just kind of like have that mentality in order to affect long-term change. And to me, that's an exciting, it's exciting and also boring, because we just got to stick with it and do the right thing every day.
Yeah.
But so for you at Hickory Nut Gap, how would you explain this to a farmer who's what we would call conventional farming?
Sure. Yeah.
To change their business model? Like, where would you even begin? Because I have to imagine that the costs for you, and it seems like you've figured it out in a certain way where you're starting to, as a business, talking strictly business, doing well. Like, you've got Whole Foods as a customer, which I have to imagine helps, and some other things. But a farmer who's not doing it that way, what would you say to them?
I mean, I think farmers at the end of the day just want to care. They care about their land.
Yeah.
They want to do the right thing. They care about making money.
Yeah.
You got to make money to stay on the farm.
But at that money piece, I have to imagine, well, if I cattle feed my farm, my cows, I have product all year round. Like, I don't have the same issue with the grass feed. I get more fat, more marbling, more of that, all that stuff that's bringing me in more money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most farmers in the Carolinas, say, or in the Southeast region, sell calves to feedlots in the West. And so most of their revenue comes from selling those calves, right? Like they'll grow it to like 600 pounds and then wean the calf, and then they'll ship it to a sale barn around here somewhere. And then from the sale barn, it gets bought by buyers and then shipped to some stockers, and then goes to the West at 800 pounds and then goes on feed, right? And so there's really very few processing plants here in the Carolinas. It's one of the challenges we have, is to take those finished animals and package them in a way that's consumer friendly and actually, able to do business with retailers and food
so if
service.
I was smart as a business person, I'd figure out the processing plants, and then I'd be rolling in the dough.
Well, yeah, no, I've looked at it a lot, and I'm not sure that's true.
Oh no.
And it's such a scaled industry, right? It's part of the food system, right? And the processing infrastructure. I mean, we're killing 30,000 hogs a day right now in Tar Heel, North Carolina. Most beef. There's 4 companies that do like 85% of the business in beef right now. And so those are so much, like, they're like $50 billion companies. Yeah. And so,
that's what I'm saying. You got to figure that out. It's just like in the wine business, it was like, I'm the idiot that's selling the wine, or, you have the other people that are making the wine. And like, the real people who are making money in the wine business is the people who have figured out the logistics of shipping and trucking. So if I could do that, I'd really make a lot of money. So I'm saying the parallel seems like the processing, but
And one of the challenges of processing is that USDA has regulations that are pretty reasonable for small scale plants, but because the food system got so big and the cost of production got so low in the West,
you have to be able to do a high volume.
Yeah, and then it's like these processing plants can kill them so cheaply that if you raise a cow here, even on feed, right, regular system, feedlot. Have a little feedlot and finish your animals here, take them to a local processing plant, kill them, bring the meat back and try to sell a ribeye. You're going to have 40% higher costs than buying it in from the West.
Yeah.
And so what all these like local USDA mom and pop slaughtering processing plants that also sell meat on the side do now is they do the custom kill for like freezer beef for families and these types of things. And then they buy in middle meats out of the West and sell ribeyes from the West, right?
Got it.
And so that's the business model generally for these small packers. So, you could have a whole nother podcast on the state of the processing business, right?
Yeah.
So, but to my initial question, back to like, what would you tell a farmer that's interested, or somebody, or like, what would you give them a read? How would you get them started on this process?
That's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. Talk to somebody that's already doing it. It's a good strategy. I think it's consumer demand too. Like as we grow, we see double-digit growth year over year for our company.
That's amazing.
And so it's like, hey, consumers are obviously trending towards this. And really, working with a company like us, we have this community partner belief system, and we take that to our DNA. That's who we are. We're building community through agriculture, and so we want to do right by people that we do business with, and it's not just a product that we're buying from you. It's like we care about your family. We want to do business in an ethical way, long term.
Yeah.
And so that's what we want the brand to represent to people and to consumers ultimately, because that's what we're trying to do, is just build trust and connect the dots between all these things, which is hard to do. And it takes an organization of people who care about doing it right. And so at the end of the day, and I'm a big believer that like the right way for us to live on this earth in a way that's inspiring and good is the more people on the land who understand nature, who understand farming, and who understand how to make this work. Like getting people back on the land is a big win because then we can have more farmers doing things. You know, this whole concentration of agriculture and consolidation of farming creates problems in like rural America, right?
Yeah.
All these towns get hollowed out. So let's bring people back to the land, learn how to do things regeneratively, and build a different kind of a food system. So it's a pretty big ambition.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
When watching Yellowstone, is it a documentary to you? It's silly, like you have to. That has to be your number one show,
So
right?
it's entertainment.
It's not like that's not like
Except for my
what
wife,
life
who
is.
can't watch any violence ever, and so she can't watch it. But it's
Yeah.
total entertainment. But what I love about Yellowstone is the beauty, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
and the feeling of being on the land and the connection to land, and that show does a great job
Yeah,
bringing that home. And I admire that, and that's how I feel every day when you're out on the farm and you're doing stuff. That emotional connection to land is such a human part of the human experience. That show illustrates well.
Yeah, it's like asking a like a army or special ops person, "Hey, when you watch Jack Ryan or Reacher, does it feel real to you?"
Yeah, we don't kill people.
You don't have like a
team
mountain
of mobsters that go around and
Yeah.
beat people up.
you know, like a mountain. You just throw people away.
Yeah, totally.
Go take them out
Take
to
'em
Wyoming,
to the train station.
whatever.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
Where's the name Hickory Nut Gap come
Yeah,
from?
that's so right there at the farm. You know, we were lucky in a lot of ways because the family farm is about 20 minutes from Asheville, and right behind us is the Hickory Nut Gorge as it goes down to Lake Lure and
Okay.
Chimney Rock. And so when my great grandparents moved here, they just called it Hickory Nut Gap Farm. And then, you know, we sold Hickory Nut Gap Farm eggs forever. And my mom, everybody knows my mom in town. She runs a summer camp, and I, you know, in a lot of ways, like we've built a meat company. But it's also like my grandparents, everybody knew my great-grandparents, everybody knows my mom and dad. And so there's a lot of people that have come before to kind of like help establish a sense of place and a beautiful thing. And in some ways we were really lucky because we were so close to a city like
Yeah.
Asheville that had such a great food service industry in the early 2000s and so many cool chefs that, you know, now they're just our friends and we've all raised our kids together and done business. So it's really just a nice community to be in.
This is very cool.
Yeah.
I want some Hickory Nut Gap. I don't know if I'm assuming you don't do a brisket, but maybe we can
No, we do a brisket.
Oh, you do a brisket?
Yeah.
We need some at Bubbles and Brisket this year,
Okay.
which we haven't officially announced, but I think we're pretty certain the date is June 1st. It's always the first
Yeah.
Saturday in June. So
Save the date, everybody.
Save the date. One last thought that I was thinking of as we were having this whole conversation, that it seems to me a parallel with the motor vehicle industry. You were talking about Model T, bringing it all the way back to them. You know, like electric cars at one point were just a thought, right? And some big motor companies dabbled in it, but it wasn't really a thing. And it took a guy like Elon Musk, think about him as you will, but to build Tesla and to build something that was like viable that people now wanted to buy for other huge car companies to think like, oh, we got to lean into this electric
Paradigm
vehicle.
shifting, as we've
Yeah,
mentioned.
paradigm
Yeah, there you
shifting.
go.
So maybe Hickory Nut Gap just needs to like somehow do it on a large scale to produce the next like Hickory Nut Gap burger joints across America using grass-fed beef.
Sounds ambitious, but I think we do need to change the food system. And,
Yeah.
and every little
Yeah.
bit that we change it is going to be a good move. So we want to be helpful
Yeah.
and be a participant in it.
This is
Well,
great.
we appreciate you coming on in here, coming all the way out. And we look forward to working with you in the future. You know, like I love knowing great local ranchers, farmers, growers, just people that help the community, because that's really like the whole story. Like we start getting the whole story of this food and beverage industry when we start talking about the land and how we grow it to then, you know, final on the plate. And so it's great having you in here and learning a whole lot more about that part of the industry inside of this industry.
Cool.
So thank you. And Matt, what do you got?
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. And I'll say that if you want to learn more about regenerative farming, definitely reach out to Mr. Jamie Ager here at Hickory Nut Gap Farm. Look for their products. But also go and just Google it. And we're available on all podcast platforms. But you should Google the Alan Williams episode of, I think it was entitled How Regenerative Farming Can Change the World. I don't remember what episode it was, but if you just Google it.
Yeah, it's the Stop Plowing and Save the World with Regenerative Agriculture from June 13th, 2019.
Wow.
Put a link in it on the show notes.
Like I said, for everybody out there, go get yourself some Hickory Nut Gap grass-fed beef, and you will eat extremely merrily.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for listening to the NC F&B podcast. And if you've stuck with us this long, review us on iTunes, and remember, 5 stars are encouraged.